So I study people for a living, and the truth is that we all do. I'm just lucky to get paid for it, which is nice. What I do is I ethically hack people. And how you do that is by trying to figure out why we do what we do, and what we believe, the values that we have, that's where the clues really lie. And most importantly, the stories that we tell. Now, thinking of the earlier stories that stayed with me, that would be back in 1998 when we were working on a condom brand. It was always good fun. And you start talking to people, and in this case it was lorry drivers. So, what brand do you use? How do you use it? What do you do after? And we learned that they toss it aside. No, not really. They don't toss it aside, but they actually wash and reuse it. Now that completely defeats the purpose, obviously, but these guys believed they were getting great value from it by doing that. And that at the root of it, would we ever know these stories if we didn't ask them? We wouldn't, and that's why this whole thing becomes very, very important. Because occasionally you may see a really powerful movie or a powerful ad that seems to just connect deeper and get the truth of where you're at. And that really is what cracking the code is about. Because if we don't really get to understand why people do what they do, we'll never understand problems, and then we can never really have solutions. So one of the approaches that, that seems to work for me is that I have 3 guidelines. Oh, that was the condom thing. And it made for really a lot of jokes because we would be like, do you put it on a clothesline? Like, would you put pins on it? Is there competition on who washes whitest? If there's rain, do you run in with it? Those kinds of things. But cracking the people code is interesting only because you never know what you're going to hear next. And especially with India, the stories can often be pretty incredible. So the first guideline is that hypotheses are almost always more powerful than assumptions. When you have a researcher or a scientist or an academic, they start with hypotheses. It's a no-brainer for them. But for us, we don't hold ourselves to such high standards. So we can just be like, I believe it is so. Fairness creams are racist. Girls are weak at math. You can just say what you want, and it can be opinions, it can be bias, and that's good enough because that's data enough for most people. But hypotheses, they sort of demand more, as opposed to an assumption, which is it is very comfortable in its certainty. It takes what seems to be the case and makes it definitely so. But a hypothesis asks you to think more about it, investigate it, and understand it, which is why in the end, it could be more powerful to crack people code. And an example of that is this image. Many of you may have seen this. It did go viral. It was a moment to celebrate. There are so many things beautiful and lovely and different about it. It was a feminist story, and one writer from Kolkata, he described it, and he talked about how there were these beautiful, colorful silk saris and gold in the border. There were the gajras in the hair, the puttu in their forehead. And he went on about how amazing and different it was. You may see it during Pongal and Navaratri and during weddings on Facebook. But would you see it in this scenario was sort of the premise. And many people were like, yeah, we should never judge people by what they wear. So that was, and the reason because is we don't typically expect that women dressed like this would be at the cutting edge of science, right? There's only one problem with that. Pretty much all of this is mostly all assumption, because here's what happens. These women were not the scientists at the launch of Mangalyaan. They were admin staff. And to date, a lot of people still believe that they were the scientists. The second thing about the feminist story, the core team that worked on the launch of Mangalyaan has 14 men. Of the 14 men, 3 men were called Krishna. It had that much diversity within the men. But they really weren't core women. And we started hearing stories of the women 2 years later when BBC did a feature. So you may have read later or heard later Ritu Karidal, T.K. Anuradha, Nandini Harinath, but not at the time that this really came out, because what most of the people saw was this. And the final thing is that if you actually did study fashion and what working women wear, older women tend to wear sari because what's considered formal is sari or Western, and not a lot of 45-plus-year-old women tend to wear Western clothes. So it's not that unusual. So when we look at something like this and think that the clothes don't tell us anything, that would be wrong only because clothes hold a motherload of data about people. They talk about our values, they talk about our beliefs, the statements that we want to make. So it is sort of like looking at these women and saying that not understanding what ISRO is about, what these senior women are about. It is like looking at bagpiper players in Scotland and saying, oh my God, they wear skirts. Because it just reveals more about our own cultural ignorance than it does anything about these people. So hypotheses are more powerful than assumptions because assumptions let us sort of sit in a comfortable cloud of ignorance, while hypotheses demand that we sort of like take a light and move forward and try to investigate and understand better. The other thing that happens when I tell people what I do is they ask like, so you talk to people, don't they lie to you? I mean, house tells us everybody lies, and Indians lie better than most people. So isn't that the case? What I do find is that genuine begets genuine, meaning that if you are genuine, people will be genuine right back to you. And most people really want to share stories, they want to tell you. There's a listening deficit the world over, and we don't generally get to listen to people honestly telling you what they think. See, researchers are not the police. We don't read confessions out of people. We just want to know what really is going on, and you have the choice to tell. And usually people do. They want to tell you what's going on. And when they do, something beautiful happens. They sort of start understanding more about themselves, their worlds, their homes, their relationship with their spouse. This visceral power of an open and genuine conversation, it unlocks their own world. But what we do find, though, is that sometimes people can be misinformed. And an example of that would be, like, I was speaking to someone who shops at Big Bazaar, and I said, what brand do you get there? He said, Dolce & Gabbana at Big Bazaar. So, and then I was like, are you sure? And then later on I find out he's talking about a brand called D.J.&C. I've shown a Saffola muesli ad, a beautiful ad, shown it twice, and asked a group of housewives what they just saw. They were so confident that it was a Kellogg's muesli ad. So, and also, if you talk about things like in fashion, I say, so what do you like to wear? And someone will be like, palazos. It turns out that they're talking about palazzos. Now, it's easy to say that people are misguided, they don't know what they're talking about, and that sort of thing. But this is what happens when you have a country where English is not the first language. Literacy levels vary a lot. So it's just bound to happen that, and people, not everyone cares very deeply about everything. People usually just care about what they care about. They don't care about the whole world. So it's important to understand that, because when you can get simple things like this wrong, example, we need to mock this guy for, after the Snapchat controversy and India's war and all of that, to say that, you know, what an idiot. And he's obviously like easy social media bait, and people can have their fun with it. But the thing is that this was more widespread than we like to believe, and we're all given to doing it as well. So if it's going to be like that with something simple, then you have to think about, if you talk about more complex things, like why do I wear a hijab? I'm a Hindu who eats beef, and why do I do that? Why do girls really not do as well in careers with math and science? So when you have things like this, then it's important to have those genuine conversations with a lot more people. And that's the only way you really get to know these truths. And you can find the solutions then to make some of these things better. Another example also is fairness creams. I was talking about why do people use fairness creams. But ever so often in India, this kind of happens on a cycle. There'll be this huge furor saying it's racist, it's manipulative, the marketers prey on our insecurities. You hear all of these things being said about fairness creams. And then someone like, say, an Abediyol or a Kangana Ranaut will get on board and tell us how the actors are selling themselves out and all of that. And that's a very fair view to hold. But it's also important to know, why then is it a 3,000 crore legal industry? Not just in India, because it's not just about us and our skin and our issues. From Japan, which is one of the biggest markets for skin lightening, from Japan to Australia to Asia, Americas, and Africa, this is a huge, huge deal. In fact, by 2020, it's expected to be $23 billion. Why then would that happen? What really is working here? One of the things is that it does speak to code. And when that happens, then it's obviously a lot more complicated. You can't just say dark is beautiful. That's not how you change something. Because if you actually did speak to people who do use fancy creams, you'll hear some of these things. They don't care about racism. They don't care about regressiveness. These are not things that they think about. But what they do care about is being accepted, being respected, feeling desirable. These are the currencies that they crave for. And it's not that easy for them. Someone like Nandita does, or even many of us here, can say, you know what, I don't like this question, and I'm just happy that I am dark. They don't have, not everyone's life is that easy, and people, they want that social approval. They move as a group. So then what really happens with them? They use the cream because it gives them something. They wear it on their faces because for them it's like an armor that allows them to face the battle of daily life. That's the code that it cracks. And if you try to remove that armor, it weakens them. So then why would they give it up that easily? And this is one of the reasons why this keeps coming up again and again, and yet it doesn't really change anything. Because these people are not really listening to Abhay Deol's point of view on this particular issue. So what I just did about this whole going deeper, because if you ask a question, why do you do this? People say, why? Because it is good only. And that's not really going to tell you anything. You need to dig deeper. You need to get beyond the surface of that skin to the soul, to that emotional underpinning, to that code below. And it happens only when you know what you're doing and you talk to a lot of people about it and you're willing to listen, have that genuine conversation. So that whole process is called unraveling the why. It just doesn't come that easily and immediately. Now the question you can ask is, shouldn't these people though, don't they actually also prefer light skin? Isn't that an issue? Sure it is. Shouldn't we as a nation sort of challenge this and be less prejudicial towards dark skin? Sure we should. But if you go about telling people, you're stupid, you're regressive, you're racist, you're manipulative, that really doesn't achieve anything. It's sort of like going on social media and saying lip dart and pup and things like that. Because that doesn't really attack the code. You don't necessarily have to attack the code as much as understand it. But without that, otherwise we're just staying at the surface. And especially what we're looking for is real positive change. Why is Bharat not as Swachh as we want it to be? Why is it that when someone wears a hijab, we feel a certain way? Why shouldn't they get to wear that? Why can we not? The other question that comes along with this is how far do we really want to go? Because not everybody will be, hang on a second, I have these hypotheses. Here's my checklist. That's not the way it really works. Because sometimes you're just there to have fun on social media, and that's okay. We can have fun. We can rip each other. We can have really dark jokes. All of that is absolutely fine. But if we truly care about something, why won't people stop using plastic as much as they do? Because it hurts the environment. That's a serious question. Now, if you really want to understand that, by just accusing people who use and throw plastic, that doesn't, again, change the status quo. It becomes critical then to figure out what the hypotheses are, to have a genuine conversation, not with one, but with many people who do this and figure out various perspectives. And then finally to unravel that why and figure out the code. Now, people are complex, they're diverse, they're fascinating, and there are so many stories that we need to know. And this is just one way we can get to that. I don't claim that it has all of the answers, but it definitely is a start. Because unless we understand where people come from, it's going to be very tough for us to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.